All right, it looks like we are live. Welcome to Project SIP's Proposition Ballot Measure podcast. SIP stands for Shelter in Place until we can come up with a better name. My name's Daniel. I'm here with Amanda, Tyler, Kylan, and Tom, and we're going to be talking, possibly arguing about the various ballot measures that are on the ballot this year. So we're actually going to start at Prop 25 and work our way backwards. So Amanda, would you like to tell us about Prop 25?
Sure. So simply put, it is whether or not we want to end cash bail in California. So previously, there was a bill passed in the legislature called SB 10, which said, hey, we're going to end the cash bail system and instead use risk assessment tools based on algorithms and various data points instead of cash bail. That was challenged, so to speak, in the courts, and it ended up being put on the ballot as Prop 25 to let the community have a say in that. For those of you who don't understand how bail works, I'm a public defender in California. So I'm a criminal defense attorney, and the way bail ultimately works is that a dollar amount is put on any criminal allegation, whether it's driving on a suspended license to murder. And the dollar amount is supposed to represent an amount that can ensure a person's appearance in court if they pay either the whole amount or use a contract with a bail bonds person to pay 10% of that amount. And the idea behind why it's okay for people to pay to get out is essentially that if you can afford it, you are safe in the community. You're not going to be a risk if you can afford to bail out. There's a lot of controversy about bail because it kind of feels counter to the presumption of innocence, that people are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And it keeps people who are poor in custody longer than people who are not poor. And a lot of times it keeps innocent people in custody longer than they should be. And so with Prop 25, if you vote yes, you're voting to uphold SB 10. And it would have the Judicial Council of California create or look for or find risk assessment tools for pretrial detention. So it would no longer be based on a dollar amount. It would be based on these risk assessments. A no vote would be to repeal SB 10 and keep the current system in place. Now, the current system also involves a couple of California appellate and Supreme Court decisions, California Supreme Court. One is Humphrey and the other one is In re White. Humphrey was a year or two ago. In re White was this year. And ultimately, Humphrey said that you have to take into account how much a person can pay, how much they can afford to pay when determining bail. So for example, I had a client who he was homeless. He was, he didn't have a record. He was in his 40s. He had previously been gainfully employed, and he had been charged with some misdemeanors and a felony. And based on that Humphrey decision, a judge let him out completely. No, he didn't have to pay any bail because of that decision because he couldn't afford anything. Other judges, if my client had a history of failing to appear in court or the allegations were more serious, the judges might put a dollar amount on it still, but it would be a dollar amount that was based on how much they could afford to pay, coupled with an amount that would assure their appearance. So maybe I say my client can afford $50,000, Your Honor. Judge might do $75,000, might do $100,000, make it a little bit more difficult, but not $500,000 like they might under the previous system. In re White, sorry, one more thing, coupled with Humphrey, said basically that on top of this assessment of how much somebody can actually afford to pay as a new element to bail, okay? The judges are also supposed to look at whether or not the government can show by clear or convincing evidence that the person presents a substantial risk of death, great bodily injury, or threats to a specific person in order to deny them bail entirely. So that's kind of the framework that would stay in place if you vote no on Prop 25. The arguments for Prop 25, are completely valid. The cash bail system is inherently classist. It's racist. It's unfair. People who don't have a lot of money, or their families don't have money or property, are not going to be able to pay their way out of pretrial detention. And poor folks who are detained for things that are either lower level or the exact same type of crime won't be able to get out. And so it is very inherently unfair. And the bail bond system, the bail bonds industry, arguably, can exploit people as part of this process. Opponents for Prop 25 argue ultimately that this is not the way. This is not the way to get rid of this system. It's well-intentioned. It's unfortunately not going to solve the problem. So Daniel, with that, can I give my opinion or a little bit more into this?
Please do.
Okay. So, public defenders and defense attorneys across the state, we're not a monolith. There are differing opinions, but the California Public Defenders Association, California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, which is our lobbying group for criminal defense attorneys and public defenders in the state, the ACLU, and various other organizations that deal with criminal justice and reformative justice, the NAACP, organizations like that oppose Prop 25 for a very kind of specific reason. And that reason is that these pretrial risk assessments are going to result in more detentions ultimately. And so for my experience as a public defender, there are things in the system that judges, they look at them and they say, that's gold, I'm going to do that. That includes probation reports. That includes federal sentencing guidelines. That includes various sentencing schemes. And it includes pretrial assessments. So there was a study done recently by a company called, let me see, where did I find it? It was called Mapping Pretrial Injustice. And it looked at various states that already have pretrial assessment, risk assessment tools, and found that it didn't actually decrease across the board the number of people in pretrial detention. In about a third of the states, the numbers went down a little bit, but in 2/3 of the states, the numbers stayed the same or went up. These pretrial risk assessment tools are problematic because the data that they're based around is impact. I don't want to say the data or the algorithm is racist, but the data is pulled from things that are affected by racism and systemic racism. So in Sacramento County, where I work, we are doing a 2-year pilot program right now for pretrial risk assessment tools. And the judges are given a sheet of paper for every single person before them that lists them either 1 through 6, 1 being the best, 6 being the worst, for pretrial monitoring levels, or they're told they're going to be detained. And what these kind of include in terms of the data that is pulled from, it goes to age, whether the current offense is violent, and that is not based on the legal definition in California of violence. The age of their prior offenses, pending charges at the time of arrest. It can include if they've failed to appear before, if they have prior felony convictions, prior violent convictions, prior misdemeanor convictions, if they've previously been sentenced to prison, how old their failures to appear are. Other pretrial risk assessments include assessments of employment, of where you live, of substance abuse, if you're currently under supervision, criminal behavior generally. And all of these things can be impacted by systemic racism, whether it's they're pulling data from the jurisdiction that you live, whether it's you have a prior record because of racism within the system. Do you have a prior record that includes felonies or prison because of inherent racial bias that affected those cases and affected your life in the past? And, this is something that we don't like the cash bail system because we've seen our clients languish in custody when they're innocent and when they're not, when other people are, able to afford to get out. But these risk assessments are not going to solve the problem. And ultimately, what's going to end up happening is if this passes, people are going to be like, well, our work is done. We did it. We solved racism in the criminal justice system. It's done. We don't need to fix this. These are great. These are perfect. And unfortunately, this is not the way to solve this problem. There are better tools that can be developed that can try to be as free of these problems as possible. And you can't use data that's based on, racist inputs. You can't use data that's based on things that aren't particular to the person necessarily. I mean, I have misdemeanor cases right now where my client was recommended for level 6 monitoring, which means a GPS device for a misdemeanor that did not involve a victim or did not involve a sex offense, did not involve domestic violence, did not involve regular violence. And I'm like, how did they even reach that conclusion on a crime that they can't go to jail for more than 6 months of their time for? And judges look at these and they say, yep, we're going to do that. Right now, under the current system for counties in California that have these pretrial assessment tools, they're not actually required to follow them because the judges still have the option of saying, okay, I'm going to do bail, or I'm going to release you on level 3 pretrial monitoring. And you need to check in with a probation officer, and you can't go back to that Walmart, while you're doing this. And you have to do 2 AA meetings per week. There are different ways to do this, different alternatives to do this. And locking the system in to a pretrial risk assessment tool way of doing things is, in the opinion of many public defenders, including San Francisco's public defender, and that's kind of like the top office in the state, arguably the country, we plan on voting no for this. And it's frustrating for us because we wish it were different. We wish it were better. We were, hoping that this could all be solved with one thing, but I don't think it can. It's my personal opinion. Some of my colleagues disagree with me because we do recognize how horrible the cash bail system is for people. But this is not the way. So anybody have any questions?
I was going to say, I agree with a lot of your assessments because there's the whole entire issue of what we put into data is what we get out of it. And right now we can't necessarily say the data that we're giving some of these computer algorithms will be the output that we want for sure.
Yeah.
And it, like you said, 25 is well-intentioned. It's meant to fix an unjust system where you have some people that can afford a $500,000 bail because they live in one of the richest areas of the country. And then you have some people that have much smaller offenses that can't afford a $500,000 bail for something such as shoplifting, just because of a lot of other things that had happened in their past. And it's not a third strike necessarily. It's nothing big. It's not like they stole a car, they stole a pencil or something like that.
Yeah, well, and the cash bail system is also very frustrating because every county is allowed to have their own valuations. We call it a schedule. So every county has a bail schedule. And, burglary in Sacramento County is $50,000 bail if it's a felony. And it could be something totally different in Marin County versus San Diego County. In Sacramento, if you have a prior violent or serious felony on your record, no matter how old it is, it could be from 1977, your bail starts at $500,000 unless a judge makes an independent determination based on the facts of your case, based on the facts of your life, based on your history, and based on how much you can afford because of the Humphrey decision, that you should have less bail. So I had a client where, my position was he was completely innocent of everything. People left shit in his house. They were there. The people who had the stuff in his house that he wasn't allowed to have were there when the cops came. And there were just a lot of problems with the things he was accused of. But because he had a prior strike on his record from when he was a very young man, his bail was $500,000. And thankfully I was able to convince the judge, based on the fact that his family could only afford 10% of 100,000, to reduce it to 100,000 based on the weakness of the case, based on the fact that he hadn't had anything on his record in a very long time, even though he'd been to prison before. So without a judge being able to make those individualized determinations, even though bail is like incredibly unfair and incredibly coercive for people, these pretrial risk assessment tools won't give judges the freedom to use their discretion in ways that they should.
There's a lot of gray area, not black and white with a lot of this stuff. And that's kind of was going to be my point, is just we work in a world of gray, and we need to be able to have the levity to work within that gray instead of being black and white.
I think a good thing to compare this to is the federal sentencing guidelines. And for those of you, I'm assuming vast majority of you don't know what they are. It's literally a chart and a book of points. And you get points for your criminal history. You get points for the current offense and facts around that offense. And then they take both data sets, both sets of points, and you plot them on the chart, and you go, find where they meet in the middle, and you get a range of sentencing. Back in the day, those used to be absolutely mandatory. And that's where you also get a problem of mandatory minimums in federal sentencing. And then the law changed, and now they're just guidelines, but judges are still so stuck on them. Even though they have a little bit more discretion, it's hard to get away from that. And so this would be removing all discretion from the judges. This would be, this person is rated moderate risk, so they can stay in with, or unless you want to release them this way, versus let's actually tailor this to this person. Not every judge is willing to do that. Some judges are worse than others. My client, where I got his bail down to $100,000, was very lucky we were in front of the judge that we were, instead of a different judge who would not have done that. But the pretrial risk assessment tools, I don't trust them to make sure that they are going to be fair to my clients who are Black, who are brown, who are Black, brown, poor, homeless, addicts. I have clients where they are homeless because they went to prison. They went to prison because they were addicts. They were addicts because they were abused. And it's just layers of trauma and layers of things that are touched by racism. Maybe they grew up in an impoverished neighborhood that is impoverished because of redlining. There are some risk assessment tools where they literally look at where your residence is. Are you employed? Do you have substance abuse issues? Did they interview you? How long was the interview? How did you cooperate with the interview? It's very frustrating when you get these reports and it says, level 5, and the judge is not going to agree to release them on that level. So I just don't think this is the way. This is not the way.
So Amanda is a no for this one.
I'm a no. I'm a no. Not all public defenders are. I have a couple colleagues who are like, they hate bail that much that they want this. And a lot of us are just like, this, people are going to wash their hands of it. If this passes, people are going to be like, bail's done. The problems are solved.
Tyler, are you a no?
I'm totally a no.
Okay. Quick question, Amanda, if you know this. I was reading that there's a California Supreme Court case pending around cash bail and around invalidating it.
Do you know the name of the case?
I do not, so I will get that information.
That might be helpful. Well, I mean, the Humphrey decision was initially an appellate decision, so appellate level, and then it went up to California Supreme Court, and so it's not yet final on appeal, meaning it could be challenged, I think, one more time, but the California Supreme Court did uphold kind of the major chunks of it that we care about. So maybe that's what it was, because it's not final on appeal, as we say.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So real quick, Kylan, did you have something you wanted to share about this?
Well, originally, before I got some more insight, I was actually going to vote yes on this. Then a couple of things happened. I thought it was well-intentioned because I think most of us know that the cash bail system sucks. But before this broadcast tonight, I was able to get a lot more insight from our own dear Amanda. Also, I paid more attention to the commercials, And one thing Tyler mentioned, I did notice at the bottom, that voting against this was the public defenders and the defense attorneys and the NAACP. And I'm like, well, these are, these are people on the front lines. And if they feel that there's an issue, that definitely changed my mind. And so, I voted no with hope that as the future comes along, there'll be better, data points and better mechanisms to try to improve the system. But I think we got to just continue to try to reform from the inside, try to appoint or vote in more reform-minded, district attorneys and attorney generals, and try to for states that are able to vote in judges, try to vote in judges that are more progressive when it comes to criminal justice matters. And so sometimes we can't solve everything legislatively, but we can try to put in the people that are reform-minded, change the system from the inside.
Yeah. And another thing I forgot to mention is that, we're in a pandemic right now, and there was a very controversial thing that happened with the Judicial Council, which was $0 bail and lower bail amounts and people getting released. And I think when this was put on the ballot, none of that was in anybody's mind that might happen, that a pandemic might happen, that kind of low-key bail reform might happen as a result of the pandemic. And so given how nothing has really changed in America with the pandemic thus far, I'm kind of like, why does this need to happen now? I have so many clients getting released on $0 bail or lower bail amounts, or having COVID considered as part of their bail assessments, that we've, at least in Sacramento County, significantly reduced our jail population. It's not where it needs to be, but it's, if trends keep up, it's kind of like, why does this have to happen now? Because what's going to happen is judges are going to be locked in, and they're going to say, you know what, this person's to this person's to that, this assessment says X, Y, and Z, so they get to stay in. And I think it's going to cause more pretrial incarceration than people think it will.
I think that's a great sort of example of an unintentional, basically, experiment. Thanks, COVID, again. So I've been torn on this one a lot. I think there's pros and cons. I think some of the pros that I think are important to mention are, one, that it significantly reduces the lobbying power of the bail bonds industry, which I think is a very exploitative industry. It does get rid of cash bail, and I don't like what it replaces it with, but something that is significant for California is that we do set a precedent that much of the country follows. And I think if we get rid of cash bail, that does set a precedent for that. That doesn't mean that other states will follow our solution. So I think that is a pro that I've been weighing as well. Another pro is the algorithm, is that an algorithm that makes this assessment and recommendation means that we have hard data about what the algorithm is saying. And when you have data that overt, I think it is easier to make adjustments based on that rather than the current subjective system. That being said,
yeah,
I'm not in the system, so I don't know the details nearly as well as you do. And
it's tough because, we'll have more data, but at the expense of how many people's lives, and it is very, very, very frustrating. I've had clients where, it was right after the Humphrey decision, and a judge had to assess if they were too dangerous, and it was like this person had no record, and a judge was like, "Oh, you're too dangerous. You get to stay in zero. Like you don't even get bail." And I was just like, really? All he did was like push a shopping cart into a person. Like that really? Like that was an actual case where it was, he's too dangerous. He's not getting out. And that was before we had more guidance on how the judges were supposed to handle the Humphrey decision and the dangerousness assessment. Judges are going to look at these pretrial assessment tools and be like, violent offenses, homeless, unemployed, and they're going to go with whatever the recommendation is. It's going to be very, very hard to get people out without a system that actually is a little more fair. And I forgot to mention this as part of like my background experience, but before I went to law school, I interned for the Pima County Superior Court Department of Pretrial Services in Tucson, Arizona. And my job was to interview people who had just been arrested for various biographical information, substance abuse, references, employment things. And I would get to make a personal recommendation to a judge based on that person's history. You know, if they said, oh yeah, I totally live with Daniel, he's my roommate, I would call Daniel up and be like, hey, does Tom live with you? Like, can you verify this? Oh, okay, great, perfect. And, you know, it wasn't based on a formula. It wasn't based on putting data into a system. It was a recommendation. Hey, let's put this person on an ankle monitor. Let's just release this person. Judge determine bail. And that, you know, I thought that worked. I obviously didn't know as much then as I know now, but I think even that system is a little bit better than just put it into the algorithm and let it spit something out that's going to be based on, you know, things that this person may have no control over and have no impact on whether or not they're actually too dangerous or actually going to be a flight risk. The whole concept of a flight risk to me is completely ridiculous.
Sorry to interrupt. Hold on.
That's okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
I'm ranting. I'm sorry.
Let's get Tom's take, and then we need to move on to the next.
Absolutely. Please move on. Vote no. Move on.
Okay.
So my feeling on this is this is going to be real quick here. One, cash bail is bullshit. It just is. And it's really hard for me to come to any of these conversations with anything other than a class analysis. And cash bail absolutely disadvantages people that have less money. There's no way around that, right?
Yeah.
And so this is coming from a good place. The intention is good. But if this were just a piece of legislation, I might support it and even write letters in support of it to legislators. But this is a proposition on the ballot in California. And when we pass something by a 50% plus one vote in California through the proposition system, the threshold to change it or overturn it is almost insurmountable. You can't unring that bell with the proposition system. So if there's any question about whether or not this is the right thing to do, then we have to vote no. We can't choose a yes on something that we can't take back. So even though cash bail is bullshit, and even though I want to see cash bail go, because this is imperfect, in a case like this, you can't let something imperfect pass through a proposition system. That's the end of it. It's a no because it's not perfect. We can have imperfect legislation. We cannot have imperfect propositions.
Great.
Completely agree. That's a great way to end the Prop 25 discussion.
So
Move on. I'm going to shut up.
Prop 25 is vote no. Okay. So let's move on to Prop 24, which is a real sneaky prop.
Yes.
This one is all about privacy rights and the enforcement of that, right? So basically what this would do is expand the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. It would create the California Privacy Protection Agency, and I'm blatantly reading off my notes, and it would remove the ability of businesses to fix violations before being penalized for violations. The way this ballot is being presented is, okay, actually to get more into exactly what it would do. So it'd make it so businesses are required to not share consumers' personal information upon the consumer's request, right? Note that that is an opt-out system, that the default is opted in. Secondly, it would provide consumers with an opt-out option for having their sensitive personal information as defined in law used or disclosed for advertising or marketing. It doesn't say anything about potential consequences for opting out. It just says it would allow consumers to opt out. It would also make it so businesses had to obtain permission before collecting data from consumers who are younger than 16, but not for everyone else. And also would have to obtain permission from a parent or guardian before collecting data from consumers who are younger than 13. Lastly, it would require them to correct a consumer's inaccurate personal information upon the consumer's request. This is connected to some legislation that passed a while back with the Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, where the very rich person whose pet project this was basically got that passed with the California state legislature, which passed a revised version of it. He felt it didn't go far enough, and so he is sponsoring Prop 24. Voting yes on this basically will expand the state's consumer data privacy laws, but create a whole bunch of loopholes for businesses to use to collect data. Voting no on this will expand the state's will expand the state's consumer data privacy laws or create the Privacy Protection Agency to enforce the state's consumer data privacy laws. So I know that sounds weird. Basically, a yes is expanding certain laws, but creating loopholes. A no is just expanding the privacy laws. And I'd like to go to Kylan for your opinion on this.
So on this one, when it pertains to privacy, I have a little bit of an insight. I've been working in the wealth management and financial industry for the last 16 years. And so, in banking and finance, privacy is like the number one thing for my clients, for financial institutions. I think, there are pretty robust privacy laws that are in effect. I think we could always, close some loopholes and tinker around the edges to shore up privacy. But, I'm usually pretty much a raging liberal on things. But, one thing I don't think that we need is a whole nother separate bureaucracy for the state of California, with a whole nother budget, with a whole nother layer of oversight, with a whole nother layer of red tape, that's going to impact our budget. So for me, it's a no for me, because again, as someone who's worked in banking for, over 15 years, I've seen, privacy increase and privacy improve. And I think it's, actually in a pretty decent place right now. Again, we can tinker around the edges, but I just truly don't think that we need an entirely new layer of bureaucracy in order to do that.
And I'm with Kyle in that you can have things be well-intentioned, as we're going to probably talk about it on a couple of these propositions, because here in California, basically we can vote on anything. And if somebody gets enough signatures, they can put something up. It doesn't necessarily make it better for our democracy, but we get to vote on it. So I definitely think that it's too wordy, too much lawyer speak. As with any of our agreements that we have to agree on when we sign up for an app or if we get a new phone or something like that, none of us really read the whole entire thing. And Prop 24 is like 52 pages of that to explain how our privacy and our data is.
It's basically like the iTunes terms of agreement.
It's a terms of service agreement. So, and you got to realize that also some of the tech companies have had their finger and their thumb on the pulse of what has been put in here. So I mean, for sure, it's a no for me.
Tom, what do you think?
The great thing of 2020 is the mute button.
Okay, I'll give my opinion real quick. Oh, no. Okay, we're good.
I don't know why my screen wasn't letting me unmute. But, so
He's good.
if I were to have an opinion on this, and I don't really have much of one, I would say if it were an opt-in type thing instead of an opt-out type thing, you'd be a lot more likely to get my vote. Again, proposition, written to be a little bit confusing. Propositions are intentionally done that way so that you can catch the people you want. I don't trust propositions and they're too hard to change. I'm not going to vote yes on something like this.
So my understanding of this one is like the part that really bothers me is the fact that there's no repercussion, or that there's nothing about repercussions for opting out. So there's nothing in this bill that says that a service can't go, are you comfortable with us selling your data? And if you go no, they go, okay, then we're going to charge you this rate for the service, right? At a greater rate than for the people who are opting in and are letting their data be sold. So that inherently, again, comes down to the class system. And great, so like poor people don't get privacy and rich people do. I can't get behind that. And like Thomas was saying, it's a ballot proposition, which means it's just too powerful and it's not perfect enough. So that's my thoughts. Amanda?
So I really liked what Tyler said, too much lawyer speak. As a lawyer, I don't even like lawyer speak. There are a lot of laws out there that I think intentionally have a lot of lawyer speak so that they're hard to fight and hard to break down, hard to understand. And that makes it easy to mislead people. And I'm also always wary of things where it's like, we're going to do this, but have a whole bunch of loopholes. Because then it's like, why do it at all? And if a no vote gets you the expanded privacy rights and a yes vote gets you them with a whole bunch of loopholes, why would you vote yes if you're caring about expanding privacy rights?
Thank you.
So I guess right now we're 2 for 2 for siding with the Republican Party.
It just means that we're not that biased. No, fuck the Republicans.
Radical left.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say.
I'm so radical, I'm left-handed.
I don't think Republicans have the right to have a monopoly, on, in sometimes being against certain large government things that maybe are a little bit ambiguous. I don't think that should, conservatives, don't have a right to patriotism. They don't have a right to a lot of things. I just think that sometimes, we can just use our best judgment and say, you know what, the enemy of the imperfect is not for the good, or whatever that saying is. But I don't see, being against something, certain government programs is simply a conservative thing. I only say that.
I only say that just because of the fact that in California right now, with our current climate in this state, Democrats run everything, and whatever they push should pass. And we are perfect examples of, hey, we actually look at this and we don't think it should pass. We're not going to follow our party with that.
Yeah.
I think that's also a good take. And I would say to, California Republicans, do a better job of coming up with policy and not alienating all the voters in California, and you would get back in office.
All right, Prop 23. So Prop 23. This is an interesting one. I'm going to give a little overview of it. Basically, Prop 23 says that so there's these clinics in California called dialysis clinics, which are set up for end-stage renal disease, which means kidney failure. Basically, patients go in and a machine acts as their kidney for a little bit and filters out their blood. There's about 80,000 of these clinics in California. They're set up all over the state. What this prop would say is that each of these centers would have to have a minimum of one licensed physician present at the clinic while patients are being treated, with an exception if there is an actual shortage of physicians. It means that clinics would have to report data on dialysis-related infections to the state. It means that the principal officer of the clinic would have to certify under threat of perjury that they're satisfied after review that the submitted report on infections is accurate. It would mean that these clinics would have to provide a written notice to the state health department before closing and would have to get that approved. It prohibits clinics from closing or reducing services without state approval. And it prohibits, and this is the part that's significant to me, it prohibits clients or clinics from refusing to treat patients based on their source of payment for care. So whether they have Medicare, Medi-Cal, or private insurance. Supporters, if you vote yes on this, you're basically voting yes for all of those requirements. If you vote no on it, you're saying, no, we're not going to set those requirements in place. And I would love to know what Tyler thinks about this.
So if everybody feels a little bit of deja vu with Prop 23, just 2 years ago, we had Prop 8. And Prop 8 back in 2018 was a very similar measure that Californians rejected. In the SEIU is basically, which is the labor, the service labor group here in California. They are basically trying to put DeVita and Finzius, I think is how you pronounce it, and put them in a position where they have to unionize and give more doctors and provide more than what they should. I agree. Sometimes you need some representation to get better terms for your employment in terms of pay, but kind of doing the strong arming of a whole entire industry to do that, and the patients suffer for that one way or the other. I don't think that's the right way to go. This is a no for me because nothing is said that that actual licensed physician has to do anything. They're just there. And if there is problems, they're most likely just going to call the hospital that's nearby to them, and the hospital is going to come and do anything. So do what they need to do. So it doesn't really fix anything. Just adds more layers for stuff to be delayed. Because if somebody's actually having an issue, if they're going into renal failure or they're having septic shock or something like that, something that's going on while they're on dialysis, having to go through another physician just to determine that they needed to call 911 and get somebody here for somebody can delay things by minutes, which could make things worse for the patient. So again, I'm voting no because this is just basically unions trying to strong arm this industry, and it's not benefiting the patients.
Got it. Tom, do you have an opinion on the union's involvement here?
Yeah, it might surprise you a little bit though. So
Great.
first, I gotta say that I will never be a person that's against union strong arming industries. That's just not a place that I'm going to come from. But looking at this proposition, there's a lot of really good stuff on this proposition. There's things about cleanliness and reporting. There's also something about you can't close your business without permission from the state, which is completely asinine. And then this idea that a very routine procedure, and it is, dialysis is a very routine procedure that's scripted out, that you need to have a physician, a physician's assistant, or a nurse practitioner, there for that. It's inappropriate for this type of procedure to require that. And you look at the experts in the field, right? So, okay, SEIU wants this. Woot, right? The Nurses Association is probably the group that I would look to as being the experts here. And the California Nurses Association are against this. And they're against it because there's not enough freaking nurses to do the work that this proposition is going to require. So again, where it's imperfect, we can't be passing propositions that are imperfect. They have to be perfect before you're going to create something that you just can't take back. So I'm a no on this. I'm a labor man through and through, but this is not good for California. So I'm against it.
Great. Kylan, what do you think?
So I voted no on Prop 8, and I'll be voting no on this. And for me, I have a little bit of a personal stake in this, and I'm not saying that I've been fear-mongered by the commercials saying they're going to close and people are going to die, but having my grandmother was my best friend, Martha Brown. She was my best friend, and I would do anything for her. And in her last days, she was on dialysis, and I would sometimes drive her to the dialysis clinic, and I would sit with her. And the thought that there was any chance that any sort of proposition could potentially force a dialysis clinic that she relied on to close, and it could impact people, I just can't take that risk. I want something that's well-intentioned, and like Tom, I'm a labor man. I believe in unions, and I think this entire country would be better served with a strong and robust and growing collective bargaining movement. But I'm just not here to see that this will do enough to actually improve patients. You know, if there is some data and there is something specifically that I can say, hey, this is going to improve patient care, this is going to make things better, this is going to provide more services, you know, good. I mean, if anything, just pass a separate bill to say, you know, there shouldn't be discrimination for lack of insurance. Hey, I'm all behind that. But let's not put some big thing together, you know, and you know, like Tom, you know, I sometimes with the proposition system, I hate that sometimes these propositions are so ambivalent. I hate that they're so convoluted, that they're so damn hard to understand. I shouldn't have to have, you know, a degree in bioengineering, you know, to be able to understand and make a good judgment on some of these ballot propositions. And so, you know, sorry for the long-winded answer, but for me, I'll be a no on this.
I ranted earlier.
Amanda, what do you think? Yeah.
Wait,
Amanda, would you like
me?
to add? Yeah, would you like to add some rant?
Oh, mute.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry,
There we
I'm
go.
not going to rant. But so I have like very mixed feelings about this because like Kylan, you know, I love the part that it's, you know, you can't discriminate based on race or based on insurance. You can't, you know, you have to keep data on infections and, you know, things about cleanliness. Those are important. But I also agree with Tom, you know, it's not perfect. And, you know, I've seen the commercials of this is going to raise my taxes. This is going to close my my dialysis center. And the kind of thing that has been popping into my mind is abortion legislation, or rather anti-abortion legislation, where they want doctors with admitting privileges within certain radius of a clinic, and that how that actually does lead to clinics closing in many states. And I don't know enough about dialysis clinics and the regulations to know would that reality actually happen if this were to pass? But because I don't know that, I'm like, that's where I don't know if I can vote yes, because obviously I don't want dialysis clinics to close, but I don't know if that's fear mongering. So I don't know. I'm probably going to vote no because like Tom, if I don't feel confident in it, I'm not going to vote yes. But that's where I'm struggling because in my head, I see that comparison and it's a very real thing that abortion clinics close, but I don't know if that's a very real thing for dialysis clinics just because they need to have a doctor or a PA or a nurse. But I think this is just something, it has a lot going on that I don't think all needs to be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah, so I was a yes on this until this conversation. So thanks, guys. What I will say though is, you know, most of you know this, I was an EMT for a long time. I worked on an ambulance. I've probably spent more time in dialysis clinics than most people with functioning kidneys. And I gotta say, they're pretty awful. Like, they're awful places, not just the vibe, but just they're very poorly maintained in terms of cleanliness, in my experience. This is anecdotal. There's long wait times. The patients aren't getting, you know, really treated that well. And so I would absolutely back legislation that addressed those things. And I would love some legislation that addresses care, like not being discriminated against in terms of care based on your insurance. I think that's very important. But I will agree with you guys that I don't think that this is a good use of a ballot prop. So with that being said, I'd like to move on to Prop 22.
Cool.
Which we've got a lot of opinions about. I'll try to give an overview of Prop 22 that is relatively unbiased, but I will fail at that. So Prop 22 is the most expensive ballot proposition in California history, with about $200 million being spent on it. It is a response to AB 5, which was an assembly bill that was designed to address the gig economy and gig workers, and basically set out specific requirements that if workers were doing certain activities or working a certain amount of hours, whatever it was, they would have to be classified as employees instead of independent contractors. Prop 22 specifically is a prop funded by Uber and Lyft and DoorDash that is designed to make exemptions for those companies specifically using what's called app-based dispatch to continue to classify their workers as independent contractors instead of employees. A little bit of history there. Back in August, after AB 5 passed, the Superior Court of San Francisco basically ruled against Uber and Lyft and said that they were violating AB 5, misclassifying the workers, and they would have to change immediately. In response, this prop was born. So voting yes on it does a couple things. It allows these app-based dispatch companies to classify their drivers as independent contractors. Voting no on it would reinforce AB 5 and allow AB 5 to actually go into effect with these companies instead of making an exemption specifically for them. In terms of opinion on it, let's go to Tom.
All right, here we go. This is the deal, and I'm going to need y'all to pay attention on this one. AB 5, all it does is take rights away from workers. The law as it stands today does not prevent flexible schedules.
AB 5 or Prop 22?
I'm sorry, Prop 22.
Thank you.
As it stands today, forgive me, does not do anything other than take rights away from workers. There is nothing that prevents a flexible schedule today with AB 5 for employees, and Prop 22 is just a cynical play to take away unemployment insurance, workers' comp insurance, anything that goes with being an employee away from the most easily exploitable group of humans in this state. It's that simple. The goal of Prop 22 is to just say, if we can dispatch you via an app, you don't have the same protections as every other worker in this state. It's that simple. So as people are thinking about Prop 22, look around and think, could my job be dispatched by an app? Right now, I represent lumber delivery drivers. I have negotiated an incredible wage benefit package retirement for my lumber delivery drivers, where the total employer cost is probably about $66 an hour, right? And if you can misclassify, because that's what we're talking about, misclassify people if they're in their pickup trucks in a gig economy model where they're just going to go to a lumber store and pick up some lumber and bring it to a job site through an app dispatch, and you're only going to pay them for the 2 hours they're doing it, they're not going to have that retirement. They're not going to have that medical. And I know that the Prop 22 says, oh, we created medical insurance if you vote for Prop 22. Big fucking deal, dog. These are employees already. They already get medical insurance in this country. The ACA is a thing, right? So this is just a grab at taking a group of people, like I said, the most easily exploitable people, and saying, no, you are not entitled to the same worker protections that everybody else is. You will never, ever, under any circumstances, have the option of joining the union. We will always be able to dismiss you at any time. And we're going to spend $200 million trying to convince people that that's not the case. We're going to say that we're going to give people rights they already have, right? Medical insurance and flexible schedules. And we're going to say that these jobs won't exist if they have to be employees, which is absolutely bullshit, because if there's a demand for that type of service, then there will be a demand for that type of service. It's not going to go away just because you have to pay people. What's going on? There's one other point that I want to make here. And I'm going to ask, can I circle back on this because it fell out of my head? Will you do me that courtesy? I really appreciate it. Thank you. Because this is something I'm very passionate about.
I'd like to go to Amanda on this.
So I very much agree with Tom, and I'm not even someone who has ever worked for a company that uses app-based dispatching, but I have a lot of friends who have. And my main criticism has to do with the fact that this is completely backed by specific companies who are completely funding it, and the bill is about those specific companies, or bill, referendum, proposition, whatever you want to call it. And just for a little context and history, I mean, Uber and Lyft have a track record of doing stuff like this, where if a community, a state, a city passes a law that is going to impact their bottom line, their business, they vehemently oppose it. So for example, Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the country. We have one of the largest airports in the country, which is also the hub for Southwest, Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. The city of Phoenix passed an ordinance saying that there's going to be a little surcharge on rideshare companies. So sorry, Uber and Lyft, you're going to have to pay a little more if you want to pick up and drop off at the biggest airport in the West Coast, basically. And Uber and Lyft said, fine, we're just not going to deal with Phoenix anymore. Like they act like babies. They're big corporations who, when any community wants a little bit more from them, they push back in this like weird extreme way. And so the fact that they've made this proposition, that they've backed it, that they have thrown so much money into it, money that they could have given their workers just to be able to not call their workers and to exploit them further, I can't support it at all. So I can have people telling me all day long, well, but I get to be an independent contractor still. I'm going to be like, cool, you're still exploited.
Great. Tyler, thoughts?
So I want to say no. This is one of the ballots that I'm highly torn on. And mostly for that is DoorDash, Lyft, Uber, I understand where they're coming from with this. They are basically creating a market where people should be working part-time, should be working as an after work thing. Like they could just work a couple hours and do things like that. There are a segment of the population, it's not very large, but it is a segment of the population that is working a lot with these applications, and they're making a majority of their income. While though a majority of the people that are on those apps are working part-time, a couple hours here and there. I'm one of them. There are other people that are within our podcast that have done that, where they're just, hey, I'm just going to turn it on for a couple hours on a Saturday, and I'm going to do what I need to do to make some money. I do think that there needs to be protections for those who do make this a full-time job, for sure. I think this is more of a problem with how our economy is built up right now, and Uber and Lyft and DoorDash, Postmates, and everything like that are basically inflicting that conversation on everybody in a very quick manner, because this happened in the beginning of August. In terms of AB5, the assembly bill that the judge in San Francisco upheld and told Uber and Lyft that they had to change their jobs, they're doing their coworkers or their workers. But I'm just really torn. I know I should really be against it, but I can't be fully against it, unfortunately.
Kylan, I know you wanted to get in here.
Yeah, so I just want to start with some facts. In 2019, Uber CEO's total compensation package was $45 million. $45 million. And, I definitely appreciate the fact, and the point that Tyler started to make was, there are people that do this full time to try to survive. And let me just paint a picture. There are people that wake up at 4 a.m, sleeping in their cars so they can pick up fares, and they work over 16 hours in a day driving Uber or Lyft, and sometimes both, to make ends meet, so they can put food on the table, so they can eat, so they can provide for their family, and they shouldn't be taken advantage of, and they shouldn't be exploited. They shouldn't be told that you're not entitled to the rights of an employee, because people at work, people who are part of unions, or people who work regular 9-to-5 jobs, who maybe work 25, 30 to 40 hours a week, they get protections and overtime and health benefits. Some people driving Uber and Lyft, they work 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. They don't see their families. They sleep in their car in blankets, putting themselves at risk of being robbed, of being beaten, of being killed, and we need to think about them. I'm not going to be voting on 22, but I still do it with a bit of a heavy heart. A small piece of me is also torn because I do know that there's people that do truly do it part-time and want to get a couple hours in there, here and there. And I think that I think that they'll still have the opportunity to do that. And you know what? If Uber and Lyft and DoorDash want to piss and whine like, little babies and little bitches and leave, oh, I'm leaving California, I'm out. Guess what? In our free market economy full of young entrepreneurs, guess what? There'll be another ride share and food service share that's going to pop up instantly to replace them. So they're not invincible, and they're definitely replaceable. And so that's my take on that. I think too often than not, we think about what's going to be the impact to the corporate interest. I think about what's going to be the impact on real people.
Thank you, Colin.
I would totally say that it wouldn't necessarily make it to where we would have somebody replace them, especially if you have to make them employees and you have to have them work full time, essentially. I would say the people that are working those 16 hours, I'm not saying that they're not there, because I have known, I've known a couple people that are like that. I've worked with a couple people that are like that, but I would say the percentage of that is very small compared to the overall usage of those apps. And we do need to protect those people, because with our semi drivers, the people that drive across the country, they have limits on how long they can drive.
Yeah,
literally, and we need to have those protections. But I can't necessarily say that we need to have a blanket statement for all of them.
Tyler, I want to address that, but I want to go to Tom and wrap around back to what he was going to say first.
So,
Tom, you said you remembered?
Yeah. I want to reinforce that we all want workers to do well. We do. But this idea that we need to protect people's rights to be exploited is silly. There is nothing in the law today that prevents people from working piecemeal work. If the business model of the company is that people log in on an app and work the hours that they're available, then that's fine. AB5 works with that. Every time someone repeats that, they're just either lying or repeating a lie that they believed when they were told it. It's just all there is. It's a difference between $200 million that Uber and Lyft are willing to spend, because it will make a lot more than $200 million if this passes, versus the $30 million that all the labor unions in the state were able to put together to try and combat it, right? It's a much louder voice because there's a lot more money there, but that's what it is. What I really want to, the play that I really want to point out is, when we talk about these jobs and we talk about, these people we have to protect these jobs. Every one of these little jobs that we're talking about comes at the cost of a better job. When you take and you deliver something, through, like On Track, right? That's the same idea. These are independent contractors. Every time an On Track driver, and I've spoken to On Track drivers on my street because I talk to people that deliver packages, right? I represent UPS. They tell me, oh, well, I make about $200 a day if I really, really hustle, but I still have to lease my truck and I still have to pay for my own gas, right? That job is replacing a UPS driver who's making $38 an hour, has lifetime medical, right? You took that off the road by allowing that person to be an independent contractor. So are you really protecting that person, or allowing two people to be exploited by passing Prop 22? It's not perfect. We do not pass propositions that are imperfect. This applies to a lot more than Uber, DoorDash, and Lyft. This applies to anybody that can be dispatched by an app. It's disgusting, and I will fight you.
Great. So we might have our first Project SIP fist fight after this, so stick around afterwards. I want to say a little bit, and then we'll go to Amanda for the last word on this one.
Yeah.
So real quick, first I want to look at who's endorsing this, right? We have Uber, Lyft, Postmates, owned by Uber, and Instacart, and then a bunch of chambers of commerce, and then the Republican Party of California, and then 3 unions. The California Peace Officers Association, California Police Chiefs Association, and the California State Sheriff's Association. That's it. Against it, we have Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, former U.S. Secretary of Labor Robert Reich. Let's see, the state controller, Betty Yee, and then pretty much every single union, including, the teachers unions, Labor Federation, like everyone. So I think that is something significant to keep in mind. I think it's also significant to keep in mind just how powerful this is. If this passes, in order to make any changes to it, they will need a 7 out of 8 supermajority in the legislature. And the text of the law specifically says that it can only change it in ways that expand it, basically that are in line with the goals of Prop 22. They can't scale it back. They can't repeal it. The only way to get rid of it would be another ballot proposition, which Uber and Lyft would just use the profits from passing this one to fight it just as hard. So in addition to that, we're talking about saving these jobs, these people who work, a few hours at a time, the people who need to be flexible here. I think we need to sort of take a step back and talk about why people are needing to do that. Like, why is it that people are needing to get a couple of extra hours in here and there in one of the richest economies in the world? That's an indicator of some serious class issues and some serious labor issues that I think do need to be addressed, but not by giving Uber and Lyft and these other rideshare companies an exemption from a law that applies to everyone else. My last point with this is that this drives incredibly unfair competition in the sense that now other companies will be competing with these main companies that already have a huge advantage because they're enormous, who also now don't have to have ethical labor business practices, which means that in order to compete with them, these smaller companies will also have to adopt unethical labor business practices. So I'm just a hard no on Prop 22. Similar to Tom, I think it's disgusting. I think it's incredibly cynical. And I don't like the precedent of giant tech companies being able to buy a proposition. I think that's just a disgusting way to look at our system of government, despite how common it is. Yeah, Amanda.
Well, the only thing I was going to bring up was the 7/8 supermajority required to not even overturn it, but just to change it in ways that continue to benefit these massive corporations. So I just think that's super disgusting. And I'm also just very pessimistic that it's going to pass.
Great. Yeah, unfortunately. Sorry, go ahead, Kylan.
I was just going to say, thanks a lot, Citizens United. And this can definitely be something, in a totally separate podcast. But this is why I continue and will continue to fight, to someday have public financing of elections and a repeal of Citizens United. It's blasphemous, it's disgusting, it's sick, it's twisted, it's anti-democratic that billionaires and corporations can buy democracy, because we sure as hell can't. Some people can't even buy a good sandwich, let alone a democracy. So that's all I got.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to Prop 21. Prop 21 is basically a ballot measure centered around rent control. It would replace the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which was passed in 1995. And what that did was it allowed local governments to use rent control except on housing that was first occupied in February of 1995, and housing units with distinct titles such as condos, townhouses, and single-family homes. Basically, it prevents local governments from having control over rent control. And passing Prop 22 would allow local governments to enact rent control on housing that was first occupied over 15 years ago, with an exception for landlords who own no more than 2 homes. Voting no on it would prohibit rent control on housing that was first occupied after 1995. It would basically continue the status quo. So, Tyler, I know you had some thoughts on this, and I would love to hear them.
Man, I've been holding a lot of stuff back, but I would definitely say for rent control, you look at places around our country that have rent control laws: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, and you look at how expensive those places are to live. Rent control has a lot of good behind it. And again, this is another one of those propositions that I feel a lot of good's behind it, but it's not actually going to fix the problem of bringing down the housing prices. I mean, we have people that feel like they're stuck in their apartment because they've got it at such a low rent compared to what everything else is around them. And if they leave, they can't afford to stay here. They have to move far, far away. And it's not necessarily good for the landlords because it makes it really difficult for them to get people out that need to be out. I don't feel like this is a good proposition for all of California, for sure.
Amanda, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with those points. I also wonder if, you know, the thing you mentioned about, you know, we see rent control in these these cities that are so expensive to live in, but are they expensive to live in because of rent control, or you know, is rent control trying to be the solution to the fact that it's so expensive to live in those places?
To answer the question, I would say that is one of multiple reasons why the rent is high. That's not the reason.
The question is that correlation without causation? And I think we'd have to see data on that.
Yeah, you know, is it, oh, well, there's rent control, so then when somebody moves out, they just jack up the rent, and then, you know, that cycle continues to the point where now it's too expensive to live.
I would say it actually reduces the amount of rental properties that are available because people are trying to stay in their property. That is the way I would feel about it. Sorry, Amanda. That's
okay. No, and I'm just thinking there are people who prefer to rent, who prefer living in the same place. I've been in the same place for 5 years in a place that doesn't have rent control. I just have cool landlords who don't raise my rent on a month-to-month lease of all things. You know, I see rent control as a way that can help people, but also as a way that can hurt people. If you have exploitative landlords. What I like about this proposition is that it's not a blanket, yay, rent control across the state. It's, if you, City of Modesto, want to enact a rent control law, you can do that through your city council or however it is you can pass those things. And it's, I think that is the benefit to it because it's not a blanket, you have to do this or you can't do that. It gives cities the ability to figure it out on their own and figure out what's going to work for their own communities. And on top of that, where was the exemptions here? The exemptions include single family homes. It includes, you know, it would not, like, this would not even apply to my landlords. They live in the same building as me. They live upstairs. They're a married couple who own the building. Like, that, I would not qualify for a rent control type of agreement under this. So, you know, the only landlords that I think it's going to hurt are the kind of corporate landlords. And I don't have much of a heart for corporate landlords who, you know, might be exploiting.
Yeah, so
housing is a human right, and it's not an old married retired couple who just wants a little bit of spending money for their next vacation.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, so this is not going to solve our housing crisis. This isn't going to get a bunch of new homes built. Like, this is not the solution to the California housing crisis, but I don't think it needs to be. I think it is a great stopgap solution in a state that has skyrocketing, you know, rent prices where the cost of living is absolutely ridiculous. I think it is a great thing that will help people now. And with the 15-year limit built in, I don't think it discourages new housing from being built. So, and then the biggest point for me is, like Amanda said, you know, this doesn't say everyone gets rent control. This says cities and municipalities are allowed to vote on that and are allowed to put that in their jurisdictions, which I think giving people more local, like more control over their local area is a good thing. I think that gets people more engaged in democracy in general. I think that gets people out and voting, which increases their participation in federal elections and state elections. So I think this is a win. You know, I think a lot of the people supporting it are also people that I tend to agree with, but even separately from that, I think this will help people in the short term. And start to solve the problem in the long term while coming nowhere near finishing it. And Kylan, I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so number one, you just, that was an excellent point that you bring up. And so I am a super hard, erect yes on this.
Are we SIP after dark yet?
It's after 8, so yes.
I thought it was after 9. That rule.
This
My
is
podcast, my rules.
This is going to help people. It's, the coalition that is behind this is an incredible coalition, a broad-based coalition, a diverse coalition. And again, I think we need more things that are people-focused, that will help people. Now, with that being said, I also think, just like you said, Daniel, this is not just a rent control issue. This is a supply and demand issue. This is, that we do need to have tons of more LMI, low to moderate income housing, built in California and around the country. We need middle class housing built around the country. There's people that are making 6 figures that are still poor and can't afford to buy a house. So housing needs to be expanded. And this is going to sound actually somewhat conservative, but I do think that needs to be paired with some sort of regulatory relief and reform, because as we all know, to build anything in the state of California, it's practically impossible. You have to give up a lung, a liver, your firstborn, to be able to build anything. But I think also one thing that we need to realize, what is one of the prevailing causes of the shortage of housing? What I would advocate for is there needs to be a law to ban non-US citizen investors from purchasing housing, because what goes on is people from China or Mexico and other countries that are not US citizens, as an investor, they go in and pay cash, number one, driving up all of the prices, so artificially inflating the cost of real estate, making it inaccessible to working people. And what they do is they become slumlords. And most of the time, these are properties that sit, that are not fully occupied, that are not fully rented out, where this could be providing housing for tons of people. And so those are some things that I believe would be a big help to help our housing issue.
Man.
Hard agree with your last point, Kylan. Okay. Totally, because I mean, that's what I was saying. Rent control is not the main issue. It's not going to fix the problem. You have to have all the other things going along with it. And California refuses to move forward with building better housing, more dense housing. San Francisco doesn't want to build more dense housing because it would affect their views of the Bay. Stupid shit like that. So
selfish shit.
I need to be clear. I am okay with protecting people. I just don't think this is the measure to do so, because when somebody has an apartment I keep going to San Francisco because that's the closest major city to us, they have a rent at $2,000 a month because somebody's been there for 30 years, because they can't afford what is $4,000 out there, which is the actual market rate for that apartment. But you have to keep the apartment maintained as if it was a $4,000 apartment. The person who owns that, not saying that there aren't some people that use that as extra potential income to fund vacations and things like that, but some people just use it as their primary source of income. And those people can't be forced to maintain those properties and not get the value out of them. And those are 2 reasons why I don't like rent control laws across the country. But we also could do things to increase the availability of housing. Here in California, we have that problem. We don't like to build housing. If we just built more housing in general, everything would be moderately priced for everybody. It doesn't matter if it was a luxury, a condo or not. We definitely need to have that done.
Damn good take, Tyler.
All right, so let's talk about Prop 22.
20.
Amanda, sorry. God, I still have Prop 22 on the brain. So would be pissed off about that one. Prop 20, take it away, Amanda.
Okay. I apologize in advance if I rant.
As long as I can cut you off if it goes too long. Okay?
Okay, so a few years back, we passed Prop 57. A few years before that, we passed passed Prop 47. These were major criminal justice reforms aimed at reducing prison populations, aimed at reducing jail populations. For those of you who are unaware, Proposition 47 in California reduced certain types of felonies to misdemeanors, specifically simple possession of drugs and theft offenses where the value of what was taken or sought to be taken in a burglary was under $950, which is the threshold for theft as a dollar amount. So if you go into Walmart and you take $950 worth of stuff, it's a misdemeanor. If you take $950 and 1 cent worth of stuff, it's a felony. Prop 57 did kind of 3 major things. 1, juveniles can't be charged in adult court unless a judge decides it's cool. 2, hey, prisons, you have an overcrowding problem. Can you please institute these milestone programs so people can earn more credits and like get out earlier? And 3, prisons, you actually have a really bad overcrowding problem. So for people who are serving a sentence on a non-violent offense, they get to have an opportunity to have early parole consideration, not automatically released, just like after they serve what we call the base term. So your full sentence could be 10 years, but your base term is 2. After your base term, you get to maybe go before the parole board and have them assess it to get you out. Okay. So Prop 20 ultimately is an attempt to overturn those reforms. Let me go to my little cheat sheet in a second. So basically, a vote yes for Proposition 20 would, 1, make certain theft offenses, many theft offenses, felonies again. They want to change the threshold from $950 to $250. So a dramatic jump. So if you take $250 worth of stuff, it's a misdemeanor. You take $250 and 1 cent versus stuff or worth of stuff, it's a felony. So it increases the number of felonies. And that type of felony would be worth up to 3 years in a prison potentially, or county jail prison in the county jails. And so it increases the number of felony offenses, which increases incarceration. The proposition would also change what is categorized as violent. So there are certain code sections that say, here's a list of violent felonies, and here's a list of serious felonies. There are strikes under the 3 strikes law either way, but the amount of time you serve in prison depends on which one it is, and whether or not you qualify for early parole consideration and milestone programs under Prop 57 is determined by if it's categorized by law as violent. There are some things that are serious but not violent that you would think are violent, like assault with a deadly weapon is serious but not violent. But robbery is violent. If you get into a car accident and you're drinking and driving and you so much as break another person's finger in the accident, that's considered violent. What this would do is add 51 new crimes to the list of violent felonies. And then it would also require certain DNA collection for, or DNA collection for certain misdemeanors. Voting no on this would keep things as they are, essentially. And in terms of who is supporting this bill, we have U.S. Representative in Congress, Devin Nunes, who is, I'm sorry, Daniel.
Oh, I was just mooing because he sued a cow.
Oh, mooing, yeah. This is the man who tried to sue a Twitter account because it was mocking him and it was a cow.
Yeah.
He has a lot of ethics violations and a lot of problems. There's only one Democrat supporting this, and that is California Assembly Member Jim Cooper. So I don't live in his district, but I live extremely close to it. He was a cop for 30 years. He is, how is he described? He is described as the crusader against criminal justice reform. He opposed Prop 47, he opposed Prop 57, and he actually, he has the most abstentions on floor votes in the entire California legislature. Mm-hmm. It's kind of disgusting. People vote him in and he just doesn't vote. Or if he does vote, he's voting no on police reforms, on criminal justice reforms, on juvenile justice reforms. I don't know how he's a Democrat, to be honest. But
So
he
real quick,
Democrats pick.
so for summary, basically voting yes is saying make more things felony,
Yes.
increase the
Oh.
prison industrial complex, and no is keep things the same.
Completely, yeah. And it's here, a big problem with that is the fact that we do have overcrowding. And we know that increasing punishment, making things felonies over misdemeanors, putting more people in jail, cages don't fix people. It's not a deterrent to crime. The way you reduce crime is by reducing issues surrounding poverty, by giving universal health care, better education, better support in the community. This is not a way to reduce crime. This is only going to make things worse, not just for the people who have to deal with coming out of prison and have to deal with having a felony on their record and the impact that can have on a person's life. But it also derails opportunities to turn your life around. A new law recently passed in California for diversion opportunities, where you can get a case dismissed if it's a misdemeanor by doing certain things for the court, whether it's rehab or anger management.
Before we get into a new law, let's focus back on the
Oh, no. This is coupled with it. So there are actually benefits to being charged with a misdemeanor versus a felony that actually impact someone's life. And so this is just a way to remove those possibilities, remove those options, and have the stamp of felon on more people in the state of California. And that is not going to be good for our communities. Sorry, I know I sometimes get a little off track, but this is very important.
Okay. For anyone who doesn't like cussing, you should mute this stream right now, real quick. Fuck this law. Fuck this prop. Yeah. It's more prison industrial complex bullshit. It fucking expands funding for the fucking gall of putting this on the ballot this year. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, what? We've had these mass protests, we have a president who's dividing people with this law and order message. And you're trying to put more money into prisons. You're trying to collect DNA from people who have committed misdemeanors. You're trying to expand, sending people to overcrowded prisons when it's been shown that it doesn't fucking help people. Are you fucking kidding me? No. Get the fuck out of here.
Yep. And here's the other thing, with categorizing more crimes as violent felonies, that also takes away opportunities to do fire camp. Mm-hmm. The firefighting program. You don't necessarily get to do that if you're serving a violent felony. You also serve a higher percentage of your sentence on a violent felony. So you're keeping more people in prison for longer with fewer opportunities for rehabilitation because you're eliminating them from the purview of Prop 57.
Absolutely. All right. So fuck this prop. Tyler, tell us about Prop 19.
So Proposition 19. Let me get my notes up here on that. So Proposition 19 is basically about property tax transfers, exemptions, and revenue for wildfire agencies. Basically, a yes vote will allow eligible homeowners to transfer their tax assessment anywhere within the state instead of just certain counties. It will increase the number of times that somebody over 55 can transfer the tax assessments. And it also includes people with severe disabilities. Right now, they can only do it once. They'll allow people to transfer it up to 3 times. They'll require that inherited homes that are not used as principal properties, like it's a second home that they've inherited, will be reassessed at market value when transferred. And it'll use all the additional revenue resulting from the measure to fight wildfires. And no just says, no, we're just not going to do any of that. Basically, the way I feel about this ballot initiative is, as a homeowner, I'm locked into a certain property tax amount because of when I purchased my house. I think that was Prop 13 back in the 60s or something, which is great. So if I stay in my house for as long as my mortgage is, I will never have to see a property tax increase. But as somebody that
Can
bought it.
I make a note on that real quick?
Go ahead.
Real quick. So the property tax, your property tax might go up, like the percentage. So it's based around what you initially purchased the house for.
That's what I'm saying.
So
It-
so
I'm
the
not
percentage
I'm
can go
saying
up.
it's not going to be reassessed
Yes.
at the current value is what I mean. I'm sorry. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
But for somebody that purchased a house in Sonoma County in 2011 compared to somebody that purchased a house in 1981, our property values are extremely different, even if our house is the same. And you have to add more property tax rules for schools, for roads, for whatever, for my jurisdiction, because somebody from 1981 is still paying on what their house is worth at $100,000 while I'm paying on off of almost $500,000. So I don't like there's another property tax rule that we're going to talk about too. I don't like these initiatives. I do see where having the exemption where they can somebody who is 55 and over could move their tax rate to wherever in the state, because right now you can only basically do it if you're in Southern California. But that is kind of how I feel about it.
Great.
Anybody else have anything?
I will say that this is another one of those bills that there's so many things bundled in it that it's really hard for it to be perfect enough to pass that sort of test of, do we want to do this with a ballot initiative? I do think property taxes have to be like brought into line with like modern, with the modern market value of properties. And I think it gives a sort of unfair advantage to people who could buy their house, 20, 30 years ago. But ballot initiative, this one isn't perfect enough, in my opinion. Yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts on Prop 19? All right, let's go to Prop 18. So I thought this was simple, but I have found out it is not from private discussions. So Prop 18, all it would do is make it so 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of general election also get to vote in the primary election, picking the candidates for that general election. A yes means it's just a constitutional amendment to the California State Constitution. A no is not, we're keeping things as they currently are. My own personal take on the arguments against it are a bunch of people yelling, "Get off my lawn," but I recognize that other people might have different thoughts on that. So let's see, who wants to go first on that one?
Go ahead, Kylan.
Yeah, Kylan, go for it.
So for me, this is a cut and dry, like yes, all day, yes. And the reason why is you can register to go and get killed and maimed in war at 17. You can register up until I think last year or a couple of years ago. Once you're 18, you can purchase cigarettes. That just recently changed. At 18, you can legally vote. I have no reason why, as a 17-year-old who's going in to be turning 18 in an election year, that you shouldn't be able to take part. One of the things that we lag behind in the civilized world is in democracy, is in voter participation. And I think being able to get that head start on our young people to be able to participate in being voters and taking part and taking ownership of their democracy, I think this is what we need. This is what we need as a country, because we need to strengthen the next generation of democracy. Because, I know some people may say that, well, they're going to be taking part in these important propositions or these important things on the ballot. Well, what's the difference between 17 and 18? And, from what I can see, 46% of adults in this country are abject morons, and they sure as shit don't know what they're talking about. So why should we prevent our young people from taking part in democracy? So hard yes on this for me, and that's all I got.
All right, let's go to Tyler, then Amanda.
So I am really making myself look crazy today. I like the spirit of Prop 18, I would say it's great to have more people involved in our elections. I've said this at the end of every podcast, especially when it has to do with the election. Vote. No matter what you're voting for, just do your research and make sure you're a very educated person. But we already have it to where you can pre-register for the election when you're 18, when you're 16 or 17 here in this state, which is great. You're pre-registered to do so. You can start getting involved in the process. So by the time you are 18, you can do so. This proposition is for those people who would be me. I was born in June. So in most years, the primary, pretty much all years actually, the primary would be before my birthday, my 18th birthday. So I wouldn't be able to vote for those who I would be voting for, choosing the candidate that I would vote for in November. The only problem I have with this, and this is my only little bit of objection to it, is the fact that they would also be voting for everything, not just who they get to vote for in November. There's no, I've done research all over the place, and if somebody can find something saying otherwise, I couldn't find anything saying that they can't vote on propositions, they can't vote for any measures that are local, that doesn't have any effect for November. So basically, we're giving 17-year-olds the right to vote. And I know we have to have a limit, and our limit has been 18 forever. And unless we're going to change that for everything, I don't think moving it like that would work for me.
All right, Amanda, thoughts?
So I disagree with Tyler. I think in a lot of things that we have legislated in this country and in various states, that age is an arbitrary line that has been drawn. You, in a lot of states, can get married or have sex at 16. You can smoke cigarettes at 18. You can join the army. You can enlist when you're 17. You can't drink until you're 21, and you can't rent a car until you're 25. I personally think the voting age should be 16, because if you're responsible enough to drive a car and deal with insurance and stuff like that, or have sex or get married, you should be allowed to vote for your community. So I have no problem with 17-year-olds being allowed to vote. And there are a third of the states right now allow people who are 17 to vote in primaries if they will be 18 by the general election. And that's not just, blue states, that's across the country. It's South Carolina, it's West Virginia, it's Kentucky. I see Tyler's concern with propositions, but I also, again, think that people should be allowed to vote if they're allowed to do far more serious things with their lives or other people's lives. And so I'm totally fine with this. I plan on voting yes.
Yeah, I agree with Amanda. I mean, anything that gets young people more involved in the political system. This gets people involved. And just the arguments against it on the ballot are hilarious. The fiscal impact, they literally put the fiscal impact of distributing voting materials to these people, which is just absurd. Like, are you kidding me?
You don't know how much that's going to affect anything.
Sure.
I think I saw something else that it was like, they're still children. And I'm like, yeah, and they're in high school with the people who are already voting because they happened to turn 18 in May.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
This is like saying that
children can't make decisions.
Right. Any Leos can't vote. That's what this is like trying to say, essentially. It's that arbitrary to me. Sorry, apologies to the astrology fanatics. All right, let's look at Prop 17. Amanda.
I apologize in advance again. Okay.
I will cut you off if we go too long, okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
I tell the same thing to court reporters. If I'm talking too fast, you can cut me off. Okay, so Proposition 17 would allow people who are serving on parole to vote, to be registered to vote and to vote. And the that's kind of just super basic. That's what it is. It's not like these other propositions where they have a million other things going on. People who are opposed to this say, oh, but they haven't completed their sentence yet. Like, oh, this is like so bad because murderers and rapists get to vote. And I'm like, they get to vote once they're off parole. So like, why does it matter? They claim it denies justice to crime victims, which doesn't really make sense because this isn't like they're voting on something that has to do directly with a person they may have victimized. People who are for this proposition talk about how this is, the goal of parole is not to punish people more. It's actually not even about victims. It's about reintegrating people into society, giving them the support that they need, monitoring them, supervising them. So there are different, I'm going to try to make this not confusing. There are different types of supervised release in California. There is probation. Probation can be informal with no supervision or formal with a probation officer. People on formal probation and informal probation get to vote. Probation comes after or with or without a county jail sentence. There's something called county jail prison, which is where people convicted of certain felonies who don't have strikes on their record get a prison sentence, but they serve it in the county jail. Those people, while serving their sentence, get to vote. People who are serving just county jail on a misdemeanor or a felony with probation in the county jail get to vote. They're still serving their sentence and they get to vote. If you get a county jail prison sentence, you can be given what's called mandatory supervision, where a portion of your sentence, you get out early and you serve the rest of your sentence day for day under what I like to call intensified probation. You are still serving a sentence, you get to vote. If you go to prison, you can be released on either parole or post-release community supervision, which is parole, but supervised by probation. Guess who gets to vote? People on PRCS get to vote, but not people on parole. So all that this proposition would do would make things more equal across the board in terms of if you are on any type of release, you get to vote. There's no reason to exclude parole versus PRCS. Violation, if you violate your release, it's the literally exact same punishment. And the only thing that would not change is that if you are serving your sentence in a physical prison, you cannot vote. That is the only thing that would not change. And I don't see any reason why people on parole who are being supervised, just like people on mandatory supervision, just like people on PRCS, and just like people on formal probation, I don't see why they can't vote. And let me know if anybody has any questions.
So that's a yes from you.
That is a hard yes for me.
Great. Tom, thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm a hard yes on this as well. I first don't think that there's any reason that we take a class of people that are disadvantaged and prevent them from participating in our democracy. Just because people have committed crimes doesn't mean that they shouldn't be voting. This isn't fucking Florida. This is California. My only real thought on this is I am extremely disappointed that we're doing this through a proposition and not through legislation. Californians are better than this, and we should demand better from the legislators that we send to the Capitol.
Great. Kylan, thoughts?
I am a Viagra hard yes on this.
Getting weird, man.
I just think that people should not continually be punished when they're serving their debt to society. Not to mention the broader issue of criminal justice. How many people are sitting in jail or prison right now that have been wrongly convicted, that have been set up by police, that have been lied on by corrupt district attorneys, that have been falsely accused by someone they may have a beef with in the community? All the reasons why someone shouldn't be in jail, and on top of that, to have their rights taken away from them, have their right of the franchise taken away, is a travesty. Some of the things that are going on with our criminal justice system and in our jails is is practically human rights violations. Amanda and
It
I
is
were
human rights violations.
Amanda and I were talking about this morning. They are human rights violations. The United States military have gone overseas and fought in wars and had armed conflicts against other countries because we said that they had human rights violations against their people. And so that makes us, nothing new here, the most abject hypocrites on the face of the earth. You know, people should not be forever punished. People have rights. People deserve to be reintegrated into society and not thrown and cast aside.
So
Yeah. Well, real
I
quick.
have one more point on this. I'm
Okay,
sorry,
go for
David.
it. No, go for it.
So not everybody agrees with me on this point, but I actually don't think anybody should lose their right to vote for a criminal conviction. And the reason for that is, if you look at history, where did that come from? That came from just straight up racism. It came from the 13th Amendment. Hey, we're going to get rid of slavery unless you're incarcerated, except for punishment is, for a crime. And on top of that, they disenfranchised people. And who were they primarily disenfranchising? Black people, the people they were now enslaving through the 13th Amendment and the criminal justice system. So that's something where, I have no problem if a murderer wants to vote, or a rapist, or a child molester, or the man who didn't have his dog on a leash and has to serve 5 days in the county jail. I don't care. Everybody should have the right to vote. And I just think it's preposterous that a lot of people think, well, like, oh, they're only going to vote one certain way because they convicted a crime. There is a broad divergence of beliefs for people who are incarcerated for any type of crime. So that's
But they're black
said my
people.
piece.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, Tyler?
Tyler has a good point.
But they're black people.
And Jim Cooper is a black man. So, I mean,
Okay, so look,
Daniel
This
Cameron is a black man.
yeah, this prop makes sense from every fucking angle. Like, fiscally, you want to save money, like being able to vote brings down like people going back to prison. There are studies showing that being able to vote is correlated with less returning to prison. So there, I know. I just didn't want to say it.
Yep.
Fine.
Recidivism.
Okay.
Politicization. Recidivism.
Anyways, that saves us money. Less people in prison is great. Makes sense from a humanitarian angle, because people who, like, I actually agree with you, Amanda, that like no one should lose their right to vote, even if they're being locked up. Mainly because the way we look at the prison system in this country is a fucking punishment, not a rehabilitation. And that hurts all of us. If you make prison as close to normal life as possible, then you get people who, once they've served their time, can integrate back into society instead of costing us more money. And, from the humanitarian side of things, it's not fucking evil. So, and going back to what Kylan said, like, that's not even getting into how incredibly racist our prison system is and our legal system. So, okay, let everyone vote. Come on. I can't believe people are against this shit. Like, if you hate this, then you hate freedom. You're a terrorist. I hate you.
And the 17-year-olds, let them vote.
Yeah, them too. All right. Prop 16. This one is surprisingly contentious. Colin, you want to explain this one?
Yes. So I have personal experience with Prop 16 as it connects to Prop 209, because when Prop 209 was passed in 1996, I was a sophomore in high school. I've always been very active politically. I did volunteering with an organization called Californians for Justice, and we actually stuffed envelopes and made phone bankings as teenagers to try to reach out to voters for No on 209, which was sponsored by a individual that I do not hold in very high regard, one Ward Connerly. But what Prop 16 would do is basically overturn Prop 209. It would permit government decision-making policies to consider race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in order to address diversity. And so for me, let's read who's for this. Well, basically, everybody. Everybody that's progressive. And what I want to really say is, the reason why I'm for this is look at our current society. Well, if you look at all around the country, and certain places of California, but all across the country, we can say without a doubt that there is discrimination on the basis of race. We can say for an absolute fact there is discrimination on the basis of sex and gender, okay, with what's being done to our LGBT brothers and sisters, that is being done to our non-binary people, that is being done to our trans people. Okay, so there's absolutely also discrimination based on national origin. Look at what's being done to our Muslim brothers and sisters, the discrimination that's going on with them. And so, you know, this reinstates affirmative action to make sure that those that are disadvantaged, those that are left behind on the margins, get a fair shake. That the considerations of who they are, their backgrounds, their humanity is taken into effect on the basis of employment, on the basis of education, on the basis of basic humanity, because this is what it is for me. It's about humanity. It's about, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal. And, you know, right now we don't live in that perfect union, because all people are not being treated equally. And so that's why I vehemently, you know, 100% with every fiber of my being support this proposition, to vote yes, because people deserve that basic as individuals. No one being, no one person's status makes another human being better than another. Not your race, not your sex, not your gender, not the size of your bank account, not your possessions, not your house or lack of house. Okay, we are all created equal, and that's what I have.
Great. Tyler, I know you had some thoughts on this one.
So I can say this, Prop 209 is a relic of a time when, and I say relic lightly, of a time when California was a much more conservative state than it is now. California has definitely become, in just a generation, a very liberal bastion of ideas and everything. California is not the first state, I should say, to ban affirmative action, and they're not the first one to try to repeal their initiatives that they've passed in the past. I do feel personally, as somebody who is a tall African-American gay man in the suburbs of California, that this is a trifecta of things that would generally help me. And I do look at this as something we need to vote for sure.
Great. Tom, what do you think? As you are not a tall African-American gay man.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No.
You have a
Just
great
checking.
beard.
Yeah. There's that.
I just want to pile on to something that Kylan said. When he said, look at who's supporting this. The people that are supporting this have created names that are like obviously designed to mask who they are, like secret white supremacists for equality, and we don't want to hear about people of color getting jobs. Like that's kind of when you decode it, that's who's supporting this. So yeah, I'm a yes on this. This is silly.
Silly is a great word. Just to complete that, one of the groups that's contributed a bunch of money is Parents and Students for Racial Equality, which is a way different word than equity, and Californians for Equal Rights, which again is a way different word than equity. So,
like I said, secret white supremacists for equality.
Yeah. Amanda, what do you think?
So a lot of times in discussions about affirmative action, you get a lot of white people going, well, that just means that white people are going to get discriminated against. And they're going to take my spot, they being, people of color.
The monolith.
The monolith, yeah.
Yeah.
And you have, for example, a lawsuit with Yale right now where they're being sued for discriminating against white and Asian applicants because they used race as part of a holistic approach. And that's what the Supreme Court says you can do. Race can be part of a holistic approach to college admissions. What people really forget is that affirmative action benefits one group more than any other, and that group is white women. And so, this is something that can only help people. It can fight white supremacy, and it can fight the patriarchy, and it can, create diversity, because when you have diversity in a workplace or in a school, you get diversity of thought, diversity of life experience, and you end up with people who are generally more empathetic and, kinder people, and you get better, more productiveness out of your workplace. You get, better ideas, more ideas. And so I don't see any problem with having affirmative action as an option for employers or for schools, if it means that, they're going to be able to get a more diverse pool of applicants. And, reverse racism just doesn't exist. It's a myth. And, white people really want to be oppressed really badly. And,
Can I have a crumb of oppression?
So with that really quickly, Cal Berkeley, without affirmative action, is a majority Asian American school. And African Americans and white people are heavily underserved by that university, and Hispanics are virtually not existent.
Mm-hmm.
So affirmative action would help all three of those groups balance out with the Asian Americans for higher education at Cal Berkeley.
Yeah, I mean, look, this prop kind of comes down to whether you believe in the concept of privilege. That's kind of, to me, that's what it boils down to, in the sense that, like, if I'm applying somewhere and I have the exact same GPA as someone else who is a person of color, then chances are, this isn't 100%, chances are they've had to work harder for that than I did. Just because of my, general, just because of the resources I have access to, because of the family members who can support me, all this stuff. And personally, I am totally fine with someone who has had a harder path with the same achievements as me getting that spot, because they're going to add more to that institution than I would. That's just kind of what it comes down to. So yeah, I am a hard yes on this.
Is it
do
a
you
Viagra
want
yes?
What, Tyler?
Is it a Viagra yes?
Can we not?
More like a lot of exercise and very well hydrated, yes.
A lot of testosterone here.
Yeah, so Prop 15. So Tyler, I know you wanted to talk about Prop 15. You want to go into that real quick for us?
Prop 15, really quickly, is another property tax amendment. But this time it's for commercial and industrial properties. And they have, they're basically going to try to get any extra money being spent on education and local government funding. So basically a yes vote will support a constitutional amendment that will require commercial and industrial properties, except those zoned as commercial agriculture, to be taxed based on their market value rather than their purchase price. So right now you can buy a property as a business, and the rate in which your tax increases will go at inflation of 2%, or I think it's a 1% value adjustment, whichever is lower. And so here in California, most properties are increasing at a rate of 2 to 3%. So there's a little bit of a gap, basically, of what's being charged to a lot of commercial real estate. Right now, especially this year, this is not the right proposition for what we need. obviously the state would love to get more money and earmark it for education and local government funding for whatever the local governments deem that they want to talk about and give money to. This will basically allow jurisdictions to be able to put those tax laws out there. They do have an exemption. If you have a property of $3 million or less in California, or if you hold less than $3 million in property, then you're exempt from that. But realistically, what company that owns property, who owns their own property here in California, actually owns less than $3 million? Even small business owners, they are leasing property from generally large property holders, and they have more than $3 million in property. So all this is going to do is increase their rent. Increasing their rent will increase the value of the products that they're selling, or they will just pass that on to the consumer. I'm not feeling Prop 15.
Kylie, you have thoughts?
So I feel the exact opposite of Tyler on this one. I am completely behind Proposition 15. I believe that corporations have been skating by for far too long, not paying their fair share in taxes. I think, it's almost been baked into our collective consciousness that anytime a corporation or a rich person has to have some semblance of inconvenience, that we're trained to just say that, it's going to get passed on to us, or they're going to leave and take their jobs with them because they're mythical unicorn job creators and they're the pillars of modern society. But you know what? They've been skating by. And especially in times of COVID, where state and local budgets are being busted and they're laying off teachers and they're cutting food assistance and people are being hurt tremendously right now, they could certainly use these revenues. And I think that we need to be having more revenues in the state of California, particularly from these conglomerates. And to Tyler's point, he mentioned that, a lot of small businesses, own property, they lease them, and they lease them from these gigantic commercial real estate corporations and holding companies that make shit tons of money. And it would not hurt them at all to have to pay a little bit more in taxes so we could have the resources that our state and local governments need to take care of people, especially in times of COVID, that are being strained and being pulled to their absolute breaking point. And just looking at this from a national perspective, just look at what Snappy McTurtle is doing in the United States Senate, holding COVID relief hostage, saying that we don't want a bill. So this isn't even just locally, this is nationally, that they do not want to pay any more money. They got their $2.1 trillion tax cut in 2018, and they don't want to give a damn thing to the rest of us. People who support this, the ACLU, California Democrats, the Sierra Club, basically every progressive people, based organization in California. Who's against it? The California Republican Party. Oh my God. Corporations, commercial real estate companies, and pretty much every chamber of commerce. And those motherfuckers, if whatever the Chamber of Commerce is for, you can automatically be against, because the Chamber of Commerce sure as shit doesn't give a damn about people. I am a yes on this. I am 100% yes on this, and that's all that I have. I am a Cial yes.
No one's going to get that joke. It's in the chat.
Just as a side note, for what Kyle was saying, for who's endorsed this, every Democratic primary candidate this year has endorsed this, except for Tulsi Gabbard, and we don't give a fuck.
Tulsi Gabbard can fuck herself.
Okay. The only thing I would say, just because you raise taxes doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get more revenue.
Okay.
So,
and just because you cut taxes doesn't mean that you're going to get more revenue.
Actually, we do. We have got.
Let's go to Tom real quick.
United States budget deficit says differently.
Let's go to Tom.
Anyways.
All right. So first, let me frame this conversation a little bit by saying this is entirely academic, because I don't believe that any measure that increases taxes is going to pass this year. This is just a for fun conversation talking about values, right? Because it's dead. It's not going to fucking happen. But at the outset, we need to understand that companies don't fucking die. So a company that has been acquiring properties since the 70s, when Prop 13 passed, is never going to pay their fair share. And because they're never going to pay their fair share, there's like a ghost subsidy going into that company. They're still using police forces, they're still using the courts, they're still using people that are educated in the public education system, but they're paying 1970s taxes, right, for properties that exist in 2020. It's just absolutely silly that rules that apply to people should apply to companies the exact same way, because companies don't die. I will die. My house will be purchased by someone else, and that person will start paying taxes on that date. But this measure here, if passed, would affect like 95% of the increased tax revenue would come from 5 different companies. And one of them's like Disney, right? They've been there forever. They've been on that piece of property since before there was Los Angeles. It's just how it is. And as far as, you increase taxes, then companies are going to charge more. Look, dog, Disney's charging like $76 a ticket. And if you think that is related to anything other than the absolute maximum that they can squeeze out of families taking their kids to go for rides, then you're crazy. This isn't going to affect the cost of a ticket at Disney. There will be some pain in some very small sectors, but in general, we're just talking about rent takers. We're not talking about producers. We're not talking about something that adds anything to the economy. Absolutely, wet ass pussy, yes, on this one.
Thank you for the equal representation there, Tom.
Okay.
And as for Disney tickets, I'm pretty sure they were like 70 something bucks like 15 years ago. Now they're over 100. So I mean, that's just capitalism for you. When I was reading this, I was like, oh, you know what? Some of the opponents have a good point. This isn't the right time for the economy. We're in a pandemic. Businesses are closing, blah, blah, blah. But then I'm like, yeah, but this isn't going to apply to the mom and pop bookstore that had to close because of the pandemic, or the restaurant that's struggling, that's been in town for 50 years. This is going to apply to those major corporations, those major landlords, major franchises that can absolutely afford this. It kind of feels to me like what I said about Lyft and Uber, like they can afford any change in the law that's going to cost them a little bit more, maybe even a lot more, but they're not going anywhere. They threaten to go places, but they don't go nowhere. And what did I see? I saw somewhere that like this is supposed to help fund schools, and I'm always down for throwing more money into public school, the community colleges. And I don't see a problem with my taxes going to that. I don't want my taxes to go to war. I don't want my taxes to go to someone's tax break because they got a yacht. I want my taxes to go to educating the people in my community and providing them with with the things they need to be productive members of society and educated members of society. So I'm definitely leaning towards yes on this one.
Yeah, I agree with Amanda. I'm a yes on this. In terms of our taxes going to schools, I want to live in a country of educated people, weirdly enough, because it seems like when we don't, certain things that have already been happening are happening. And just to follow up with what Tom was saying, look, it's ridiculous that Chevron is getting the same deal as grandma. The argument about if you raise taxes on corporations, then they'll pass those costs on, is just like there's an inevitability there, right? Like you're never going to raise taxes because they'll always, pass those taxes on to the consumer. I would much rather raise taxes on them and then separately get some protections in there for the consumer so they can't just pass the costs on. And I don't think coming at this with the mentality of like, oh no, if we charge them a fair price, they'll just do shitty business practices, like is a good reason to say no to this. Tyler, I've been watching you react, so do you have anything on this?
I mean, there's so much I want to say, and we don't have enough time to say.
We don't. We're a little bit over.
It's really, as much as I want to educate our kids and our futures, we spend so much in this state per student more than other places or not necessarily better education. So there are better ways that we can do this. And more money isn't necessarily the way that's going to fix it. So please. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Noted. And we will continue that conversation on another pod. So anyone who's listening wants to hear me and Tyler get in a fist fight about that one, come back again another time. And Amanda. Amanda will just, stab someone.
No, I
okay.
won't. I'm non-violent. I'm a pacifist.
Uh-huh.
I use my words and my eyes.
Prop 14. This one's pretty straightforward. It's a ballot initiative to issue $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds for the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. Basically, this funds a stem cell research institute that was approved by Prop 71 in 2004 that is now out of money. This just gives it more money. The arguments for it seem to be mostly around, yes, we need the technology, the medical technology. The arguments against it seem to be that it hasn't produced enough results to justify more money, and that we can just get that research done in the private sector or federally. Who wants to share their opinion on this?
I'm
Kylan.
always. Oh, sorry.
Kylan raised his hand first. Kylan, go for
That's
it.
okay.
I'm like 30 seconds or less. I'm a yes on this. Yay science, yay research. We need to come up with new modes of coming up with medicines and treatments and therapeutics, and funding science is the way to do that. If I was ever president, I would create a new cabinet position called the Department of Science and Technology. We need science. Yay science. That's all I got.
Great. Yay, science. Amanda.
I agree. Just like I'm totally down with funding schools, I am totally down with funding science and scientific advancements. Tyler may disagree, and that's okay.
Just baiting Tyler.
I like it. I'm going for it. But the federal government's going to do it anyway, and we're not going to get anything from it. So it's like we're just putting money out in the ether, basically. But
in the scientific ether.
But it's okay because it's going to good things. So
yeah. I think the argument of the federal government will do it is like, I don't trust the federal government to do a goddamn thing after the last 4 years, except fuck shit up.
They have more money than we do.
They do have more money than we do.
And what they use it for, though.
And the other argument is that the private sector will do it. I don't like innovation coming from the private sector in this specific case because they are incentivized to find a way to profit off of it. And
which is not that bad.
That's what I was gonna say. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's okay to make a profit. It's not okay to rape people and price gouge profit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on this, and I'm prepared to come in here and agree to support this with you guys, as long as you'll agree with me on one thing and maybe work with me towards something here. If we're going to spend public dollars on science, we don't just give the results away to private companies to sell iPhones back fucking to us.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So
yes,
I'm happy to support this. I'm all for science, but we should legislate something, state, federal, that says that if you fund your science through state or federal grants, the people own a certain percentage of whatever you produce there because our tax dollars funded it, and you're going to give some of it back. You're going to give. You invent a great cancer drug that saves lives. Great, fucking wonderful. Except we paid for it. It's our fucking cancer drug. Pay yourself. Pay your salaries. Have a nice car. That's great. But at the end of the day, it needs to be a net positive for the American people.
yes,
Agreed.
yes.
Yeah. So that's all of our ballot propositions. Thanks anyone who stuck with us. I know we went over time a little bit. I do want to go to Kylan because I know, Kylan, you've got a big podcast coming up. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah. Thank you for everybody for tuning in tonight. My God, Daniel, thank you for putting this broadcast together and getting all of us. This has been so informative. I've learned a lot tonight, and I think our viewers have learned a lot too. Would love to have everybody join me next week. I will be hosting a podcast next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Climate change, the facts, the fiction, the future. So if anyone is interested in really digging in deep on climate change and having a robust discussion about saving our planet, please tune in next Tuesday. And Daniel, take us away.
All right. Yeah, everyone, have a great night, and vote no on Prop 22.
And don't forget to like and share all the things.
Oh yeah, like, share, smash that subscribe button. Yeah, tell all your friends about us in case you're still awake. But yeah, have a great night, everyone.